This we know. In the aftermath of the wedding, Maegor declared Rhaena's daughter Aerea his lawful heir, until such time as the gods grant me a son, while sending her twin Rhaella to Oldtown to be raised as a scepter. His nephew, Jaehaerys, the rightful heir by all the laws of the Seven Kingdoms, was expressly disinherited in the same decree, the decrees of King Maegor the Cruel, Fire and Blood, the Sons of the Dragon. King Jaehaerys I Targaryen, Jaehaerys the Conciliator, the Old King, is among the most legendary kings of the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros, held up in history next to the likes of Aegon the Conqueror himself. He's arguably the most important and influential of the Targaryen kings, but is his legacy built on a lie? Was Jaehaerys even the rightful king? And I'm not even talking about the concept that his elder sister, Rhaena, arguably having a claim to the throne, which is often rejected, but something very different altogether: disinheritance. A concept that may change the way we look at Targaryen history and the rightful line of succession. How events could have played out very differently if Jaehaerys is in fact not the rightful king. In this video, we'll be breaking down this idea and the evidence for it, how other instances of disinheritance have been handled, as well as the true power of a king's decree. We will also be using evidence in this video to work out who the rightful king or queen should have been if not Jaehaerys. And well, the answer certainly raises a few questions. The end of Maegor the Cruel's reign in many ways is very chaotic as he scrambles to assert control over a realm that is slowly but surely gaining confidence to stand up against him. The faith is still a thorn in his side. He's alienated many of the great lords. His brutality towards the workmen of the Red Keep lost him untold support among the small folk. Not only was he unable to sire an heir on one of his several wives, but two would soon end up dead. Things really seemed to have spiraled out of control after the death of his mother, the Dowager Queen Visenya. Maegor seemed to lose the person who was guiding him through his troubled reign from the onset. Without her, he appeared weaker and rudderless. So in the years 47 to 48 AC, he married the Black Brides, Rhaena Targaryen, Eleanor Costane and Jane Westerling, which was one last Hail Mary attempt to stabilise his rule, and perhaps father an heir. Now the part of this that's relevant to this video is upon marrying Rhaena Targaryen, his niece, the eldest daughter of King Aerys and the widow of Aegon the Uncrowned, whom Maegor had usurped the throne from and then killed in battle, he did two very clear things. He named Rhaena and Aegon's eldest daughter, Aerea Targaryen, as his heir, until a child of his own was born to him. At the same time, Maegor also disinherited Jaehaerys Targaryen, the eldest living son of King Aerys and Rhaena's younger brother, in theory, Maegor's closest rival. Now, disinheriting someone is normally a really big deal, and only really done in extreme situations, with the only person with the power to do so being the king themselves. Doing this removes this person from the line of succession, and they and their children lose any claim to the throne. So the logic with this idea goes as followed. Given that Jaehaerys was disinherited by Maegor, whom, usurper or not, was the recognised king, means that at Maegor's death in 48 AC, Aerea Targaryen is his named heir, and thus Jaehaerys, claiming the throne, is usurping Aerea. Now, something that's really important to remember about Targaryen succession at this point in time is they never really implemented any formal laws of succession. There is a lot to point towards what Aegon the Conqueror intended it to be, given King Aerys' heir was his son Aegon and not his daughter Rhaena, but there is nothing set in stone as codified law. Out of the first four Targaryen kings, Aegon, Aerys, Maegor and Jaehaerys, only one of those kings inherited as they were supposed to. Maegor usurped the crown, and Jaehaerys was the third son, and if you believe in Maegor's disinheritance, technically also a usurper. Regardless, Jaehaerys becomes king because he has the strongest claim, being Aerys' eldest living son, and had the backing of nearly all of the great lords. Disinherited or not, functionally did not matter. He took the throne the same way his grandfather did. The worst blow came from Storm's End. There, on the shores of Shipbreaker Bay, Lord Rhaegar Baratheon proclaimed young Jaehaerys Targaryen to be the true and lawful king of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, and Prince Jaehaerys named Lord Rhaegar Protector of the Realm and Hand of the King. The prince's mother, Queen Alyssa, and his sister Alysanne stood beside him as Jaehaerys unsheathed Dark Sister and vowed to end the reign of his usurping uncle. 100 Bannerlords and Stormland Knights cheered the proclamation, Jaehaerys' proclamation as king. Fire and Blood, the Sons of the Dragon. So how much does Maegor's decree actually matter? The answer here is very subjective. The argument is that the king's word is law, and Maegor was the king, usurper or not. So in theory, this legally means that there is no legal way for Jaehaerys to become king. In fact, a huge part of the conflict in the build-up to the Dance of the Dragons really centers around how much stock you personally put into King Viserys naming Rhaenyra his heir, despite the birth of a son in Aegon. This is why the dance is so complicated and messy. When Rhaenyra is named heir, Aegon has not yet been born. Thus, many assumed that Aegon's birth superseded the prior decree naming Rhaenyra, giving the precedents set out by the Great Council of 101, the general preference for male preference primogeniture in Andal custom, which effectively means most of Westeros. Yet at the same time, King Viserys could have at any point undone his decree and confirmed Aegon as his heir, but he didn't. It very much was his intent Rhaenyra be his heir regardless of Aegon's birth. This is why the Dance of the Dragons is so fascinating as a conflict. While supporters in the fanbase get very tribal about who the rightful heir is, the truth is both sides of the argument for Rhaenyra and Aegon have elements to them that are wholly justified, and both have elements that are sketchy at best. But my point here, if you're making the argument that Rhaenyra is Viserys' lawful heir because of his decree saying so, then by that same logic, Maegor's decree means the same for Aerea Targaryen, and thus Jaehaerys is a usurper and not the rightful king. The real question here is, does the king's word, the king's wishes, really matter that much? Or is the idea only really invoked when it's politically convenient to do so? There are another few standout cases when it comes to king's decrees and how readers tend to view them. I'm going to break down another two huge ones. King Aegon IV on his deathbed decreed that all his bastard children be legitimized, an action that in time caused utter chaos with the rise of Daemon Blackfyre and the Blackfyre rebellions that would plague House Targaryen for the next century. The damage Aegon's decree did, thanks to House Blackfyre, divided and broke Westeros in a much more long-lasting way than even the Dance of the Dragons had done. Now, at the time, many could see the issue and risk of enacting Aegon's final decree, yet his son and heir King Daeron II let it stand because he understood if kings keep undoing their predecessors' decrees, then the idea of the king's word being law loses all effective meaning. But I really think the value of a king's decree only really seems to matter depending on the king in question. King Viserys I was a reasonable king, not exactly a tyrant or mad. King Aegon IV's final decree, while Aegon was an awful king, no one could have known at the time what would have come of it. One king's decree that's often overlooked by fans when theory crafting is those of King Aerys II, the Mad King. Aerys disinherited Rhaegar Targaryen, his heir, believing he was trying to have him removed from power, which he arguably was. Thus, Rhaegar and his children were removed from the succession. Therefore, when people speculate about the idea of Jon Snow being Rhaegar's legitimate son via marriage to Lyanna Stark, and therefore the rightful Targaryen claimant to the Iron Throne, you have to ignore the decree of Aerys in the process. The decree of a poor, in this case Mad King, doesn't often get treated with the same level of reverence. So ultimately, this idea of the king's word being law should have a huge asterisk next to it, asking what king it is we're specifically talking about. Different kings' decrees are valued differently. Moved by the girl's tears, Queen Alysanne could do no more than promise to take the matter up with her mother when Rhaena next emerged from her chamber to take a meal. However, she rejected the notion out of hand. You have everything, and I have nothing. Now you would take my daughter too. Well, you shall not have her. You have my throne. Content yourself with that. Rhaena Targaryen to Queen Alysanne. Fire and blood. Birth, death and betrayal under King Jaehaerys I. Okay, so let's assume that Maegor's decree is legitimate, and Jaehaerys is therefore a usurper, who would then be the rightful monarch. Well, by the letter of Maegor's decree, it would be Aerea Targaryen, the eldest daughter of Rhaena and Aegon the Uncrowned. Now, in the real timeline, any claim of hers and her sister Rhaella was dismissed, citing their gender and the fact they were basically toddlers. Now, in our hypothetical scenario, if something were to happen to Aerea before she came of age, does that automatically mean her twin sister Rhaella is the next in line, even though she was never expressly included in Maegor's decree? Or does the throne go back up the line of succession? How does their mother, Rhaena, the eldest child of King Aerys, then fit into all of this? Could Rhaena be Aerea's heir, her own daughter's heir? Let's say for a moment the events remain similar to the original timeline, and Aerea and Rhaella die before they come of age. Does Rhaena then become queen in her own right? Or does her marriage to Maegor remove that possibility? Regardless, let's assume, like in the real timeline, Rhaena doesn't have any more children and dies in 70 AC as a ruling queen. Who would her heir be, given that Jaehaerys has been disinherited in this scenario? When we're talking about brothers and sisters, there's very few of them left, so it would seem her heir would actually be her younger sister Alysanne. Now, we cannot say how Alysanne's life would have been different up to this point. Who knows if she and Jaehaerys would have even married? The butterfly effect is to really compensate for it. But for the sake of this hypothetical situation, let's say they did marry. When Alysanne comes to the throne in 70 AC, she would be 34 years of age and would have had 9 children, 7 of whom would be living. Thus her eldest son, Aemon, would be her heir. Now, we know very well that Alysanne was very pro-gender equality when it came to succession rights. In the real timeline, she advocated strongly for her first daughter, Daenerys' claim over Aemon before she died as a child, and we know after Aemon's death in 94 AC that she strongly supported his daughter, Rhaenys' claim over her second son, Balon. So much so, it caused a massive argument between Jaehaerys and Alysanne. I think in this timeline, with Alysanne as queen, it makes sense that after Aemon's death, she would back Rhaenys as her heir, with Rhaenys then becoming queen herself and the throne likely passing to either Laena or Laenor Velaryon. If we're not factoring gender at this point, probably Laena. Now, back to the bigger part of this issue. Did Jaehaerys usurp the throne from Aerea Targaryen? Kind of. It really depends how you interpret the text. The thing is, if he did usurp her, no one really cares that he did. The crown is there for anyone with the power to take it. Aegon the Conqueror had no right to the Seven Kingdoms, but took them because he had the strength to do so. Maegor usurped the rightful heir of King Aenys, but was recognised as king regardless because he showed he had the strength and will to hold the throne in the face of the Faith Uprising, which had almost brought down House Targaryen completely. He took the crown with an iron fist and ruled that way effectively, undisputed as king for nearly 6 years. Jaehaerys took the crown for no other reason than he was the last living son of King Aenys, and had powerful lords backing his claim, such as Rhaegar Baratheon. He was the figurehead the lords, great and small, could get behind in the face of an ever-worsening tyrant like Maegor. Hell, even the Faith would end up backing Jaehaerys in the end, and working with him to form the doctrine of exemptionalism that allowed the Targaryen incestuous marriages, declaring them more than normal mortal men, different from your average man. Jaehaerys became the unquestioned king because everyone agreed he was. They ignored Maegor's decree because it was convenient to do so. A key aspect of this argument that is greatly overlooked is the fact that even Rhaena Targaryen herself, the mother of Maegor's named heir Aerea, backed Jaehaerys' claim. She fled King's Landing, stealing the Sword of King's Blackfire from Maegor, giving it to Jaehaerys when she arrived at Storm's End. As we know, black fire is a huge part of the symbology of the kings of House Targaryen. Not only that, Rhaena also took Aerea Targaryen with her to Storm's End when she joined Jaehaerys and Rhaegar. She very well could have pushed Aerea's claim, or even her own claim, but backed Jaehaerys because at that time, he was the best option everyone could agree on. The fact he was Aenys' eldest living son in this case was just a bonus. While Fire and Blood is written with a very pro-Jaehaerys slant, George R. R. Martin does state in the text that at this time, Rhaena had no desire to push her own claim to the throne, let alone Aerea's. After years on the run and being forced to marry Maegor, she just kind of wanted a quiet life by this point in time. While Rhaena would later lament her own claim to the throne later in life, it would be far removed from this moment where she did indeed back her brother's claim. What this discussion really highlights to me is just how chaotic Targaryen succession was prior to the Dance of the Dragons. So much so, some kind of succession crisis like it was going to happen sooner or later. Targaryen succession up to that point had functioned on precedent, and precedent and tradition is not the same thing as codified law. When you look at the kings prior to the dance, Aegon the Conqueror, Aenys, Maegor, Jaehaerys, Viserys, only one of those kings technically inherited the throne via normal methods, and that was King Aenys. Succession prior to the dance was all but effectively done with just vibes, with people just making up as they went along until it got to a point where there was two clear factions in House Targaryen who could not agree between King Viserys' decree and centuries of precedents. It's kind of funny that after the Dance of the Dragons was all said and done, for the most part, Targaryen succession was straightforward, with a clear system of using male preference primogeniture. It only really starts to get questionable again with the Great Council of 233, where realistically, like Jaehaerys, King Aegon V was the only real viable choice. What I enjoy about this aspect of George R. R. Martin's world building is it does mirror real-world history in many ways, where in theory the line of succession for most kingdoms should be a straightforward thing. Yet, all you have to do is open a history book, and you will find several periods of chaos, with usurpations, multiple claimants, and civil war. For me, mimicking that is what does help make this fictional history of Fire and Blood feel a lot more alive and realistic.